will stand before kings. He will not stand before unknown men. If we want to be gender sensitive, we would say, do you see a woman who excels in her work? She will stand before queens, and she will not stand before unknown women, just to balance the gender equation. Whichever way you look at it, the scripture is telling us that access to the corridors of power is controlled. There is access control. You can't just walk into the corridors of power. You can't just say, well, I live in Washington, I can just go to the White House and go to the West Wing and write executive orders. You can't just do that, because access to the corridors of power is controlled. In your office, you can't just go to the chief executive's office and start issuing directives, because access is controlled. Powerful people move within their company and they control access to that company. There are passwords and codes to give you access to power. And if you don't have the codes and the passwords, power will be denied you. You can be very close to power but not have access to it. Wherever power is, there will be gatekeepers and power brokers who control access to power. And you have to connect to the right people in order to have access to the sources of power. Excellence opens doors to power centers. Your character and the quality of your work brings you to the attention of kings. There are different kinds of kings. There are lower kings and there are higher kings. There are area kings, there are village kings. There are city kings, there are regional kings. There are national kings, there are global kings. When you go to New York at the United Nations building, when it's the UN time and the American president shows up, he's not treated like the president from Lesotho or Namibia. These are all nations with a national anthem, but there are kings who have greater access to power. Now, you may be able to have access to the president of Namibia that will give you a certain level of power. If you have access to the president of America, it gives you another level of power. So there are levels of power in our access to power. And sometimes we are able to access village kings, but not global kings. May God give you access to global kings. So today, I'm going to focus a lot on the first chapter of the book of Daniel, because Daniel understood this whole system of power. I started developing this message, I think about 5 years ago, reading the book of Daniel and just studying Daniel and how he had to deal with power. So let's go to Daniel chapter 1, and I'm going to start from verse number 1. And it reads, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and the literature of the Chaldeans. Just reading that passage, you know, anytime I read the passage, I just get new, fresh understanding. I wish I could go on another tangent, but I have to stay on course. Daniel was a citizen of a conquered people. His nation had been defeated in war. He was a spoil of war. He moved from his nation, Judah, to Babylon. The interesting thing as you read the book of Daniel is the role God is playing in this whole equation. If God had to take sides, he should be on the side of Judah. But God gives Judah to Babylon. Babylon is a pagan nation, but God is taking his people into captivity in Babylon. And the Bible says that when Nebuchadnezzar conquered Judah, he took the articles from the house of God to the house of his God. But that was all in the plan of God. The things God does, you can never always understand. Now, to all intents and purposes, you would say that Daniel is a loser. His nation has lost, his king lost, and to an extent, you say his God has been conquered. Because the articles from the house of his God is taken to the house of the gods of Babylon. Now, if you were Daniel, you would enter Babylon with a low self-esteem. Everything you believed in has been overcome. The God you trusted in seemed to have been conquered. The king you believed in has lost his battle. You have been taken captive, and you are now a servant of Nebuchadnezzar. Yet in Babylon, Daniel rose to heights that he could not have attained if he had lived in Judah. He rose higher in Babylon than he would have risen higher in Babylon. In Babylon, Daniel's life is profoundly influenced by two very important individuals. And I want you to note this carefully. And the Bible mentions the name. The first is Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is the monarch. He's the king. He's the superpower of his day. He's strong. He's powerful. He's expansionist. And at the height of his power, Nebuchadnezzar, you would say, was the greatest leader of the known world. Nebuchadnezzar was the biggest guy in town. He was expanding his territories. He was growing by conquering nations and had conquered Daniel's nation. So he's one person who is going to influence Daniel's destiny. Whether Daniel likes it or not, Nebuchadnezzar will influence his destiny. And Nebuchadnezzar is an idol worshiper, but he's going to influence Daniel's destiny. Sometimes God will make people influence your destiny whom you hate. You have to be open to the wisdom and the ways of the Lord. So you would think, well, Daniel should hate Nebuchadnezzar because this guy has conquered us. He hates our God. He hates us. But he's going to influence Daniel's destiny. The second person who is going to influence Daniel's destiny is a guy called Ashpenaz. Ashpenaz is a eunuch, but he is the mentor and the power mover around Nebuchadnezzar. The role of Ashpenaz is that he must identify talent. Nebuchadnezzar is looking for talent to build his kingdom. And he says, Ashpenaz, you look for talent. You groom the talent and you open doors for the talent. Now, when Daniel gets into Babylon, for whatever reason, God had to connect him to Ashpenaz. There are people who are talented who never amount to much in life. Let me tell you this. Talent is overestimated. You can be the greatest footballer in the world if you play in your village and no talent scout finds you. You would die with your talent in your village. You can have the best voice in the world, but if no Ashpenaz discovers you, your talent dies with you. The greatest footballer in the world is not the most talented. He was the one who was discovered. The people who rise to the top are not the best. They are the ones who were discovered. If nobody discovers you, your talent dies with you. Do you think Beyonce has the best voice of all the female vocalists in this country? No. Do you think that Michael Jackson was the best dancer? No. As a matter of fact, he learned his dance moves from other people. The difference between Michael Jackson and other dancers in the street is Ashpenaz, the talent hunter, who has to discover you and bring you to the corridors of power. And may God give you an Ashpenaz who would find you and bring you to the corridors of power. It's so critical. There are people who never play on the big stage, and it has nothing to do with their capacity. It has to do with their discovery. If the right person finds you, in 24 hours, your destiny will change. And sometimes we talk about people like, we say, well, Joseph's destiny was changed 24 hours, but because somebody recommended him. With that recommendation, he would dream and interpret dreams in the prison. He would be a prison interpreter of dreams. He would do it for prisoners, but that's as far as he goes. That talent can change nations, but it can be limited to prison. David was a great warrior, but Samuel had to discover him. When it comes to moving in the corridors of power, get this and get it right. It's not so much about your skill and your talent and your ability. It is about Ashpenaz, the one who discovers you. So many boys go into captivity. And in the days of Daniel, many boys. So the king says to Ashpenaz, go through the Hebrew boys and pick talent for me. So now the destiny of everybody is dependent on Ashpenaz. They have to catch his eye. And sometimes the person whose eye you must catch may be so much around you and not reveal themselves. Because people who are looking for talent don't always advertise themselves. There are three broad categories that Nebuchadnezzar used to recruit people into the corridors of power. In those three categories, we see three gates to the corridors of power in the Babylonian system. The first category was physical form. The Babylonian system was a system that placed value on physical form and looks. Nebuchadnezzar says, I want young men who are youthful and without blemish. So I'm looking for youthfulness and I'm looking for strength. He wanted people who had strength. And then he wanted people who are good looking. Appearance. So, if you were not good looking in those days, you were in big trouble. Talented, but ugly. The thing about good looks is that it can be manufactured. By the way you dress, by the way you present yourself, by the way you stand, by your posture. The way you wash yourself, the way you smell. Because the Babylonian system is a very important system. It's a system that judges appearance. It doesn't judge character. God looks to the heart. He's the only one who has the capacity to do that. But man looks on the outward. Because we are not omniscient. We don't have the power to see people's hearts. I can't know your heart. I will only judge you by what I see. So, what Nebuchadnezzar is saying is, I can't know their heart, but I would look at how they look out outwardly. And there's a logic to it. The logic is, what he has on the inside is going to reflect on the outside. If a person is organized mentally, they'll be organized externally. So when you see a person and the way they are dressed, if the dress combination is very bizarre, and I know people want to make fashion statements, but you know, when you are young and looking for opportunity, don't make statements. You know, I mean, you look at somebody like Michael Jackson. I mean, he had to do all that stuff he did to his nose. Do you think if he had done that the first time, anybody would have taken him serious? You can make your statement after people accept you. But before you are accepted, just follow the rules. All right? I mean, you can't go for interview wearing a red shirt and a yellow trouser and a green shoe. And say, well, that's my style. Yeah, you can do that when you are CEO. Anything will be accepted. But before you get there, Ashpenaz is going to judge you by his standard, not your standard. So he says, look for people with the physical form. Secondly, he was looking for social class. In the days of Nebuchadnezzar, leadership was hereditary. Kings were inherited by their sons. Royalty was passed on through a bloodline. Thank God it doesn't work that way. But there is a social class. He says, look for the sons of rulers, descendants of kings, and sons of the rich, the nobles. In other words, look for people who have had exposure to high culture. They know how to sit at table and eat with the right fork and knife. And they know how to put the fork in their mouth at the right time. You don't just shovel the food with your fork. You know, you shovel it this way and just dump it in your mouth. The guy looks at you and says, that's a good information. I can't trust him. He's uncultured. Now you may judge it and say, well, but how can you just judge me like that? You are not making the rules. You are too low to make the rules. You have to fit the standard of Ashpenaz. Because Nebuchadnezzar says, this is what I'm looking for, and that's what he's looking for. The reason why a lot of people fail in life is they want to make the rules for the corridors of power. Until you are there, they make the rules for you. And when you get there, you can change the rules. But until you get there, you follow the rules. I recommended somebody for an interview. This is somebody who is looking for a job, always coming, Pastor, I need a job, Pastor, I need a job. So I recommended her to get a job, went for an interview, and she failed, didn't get a job. So she came to me and said, Pastor, I didn't get a job. So I spoke to the person I recommended her to. I said, what happened to the lady? Why didn't she get a job? She says she came for the interview and just was trying to be funny at the interview and informal. Looked at one of the interview panel guys and said, I like your hairstyle. And they said, immediately she said that, we didn't listen to anything she has to say. Yeah, you can say, I like your hairstyle after you get the job. Don't try to be funny. Nobody's trying to joke with you. This is serious. This is Nebuchadnezzar. He sent Ashpenaz. He has his own category. He says, I want good-looking people. I want people who are cultured. You present yourself like that. So, first, physical form. Take good care of yourself, dress well, smell well, groom yourself. Because sometimes people go for interview and when they speak, there is a release of power. People fall under the power. That's the end for you, my friend. So physical form, social class, very important. It's very important at all levels. Very important at all levels. And the third is mental aptitude. He says, I want people who are gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, quick to understand, ability to serve in the king's palace. Gifted in all wisdom, that is talented people. I want people who are talented, people who are able to solve problems. Remember, in the Jewish culture and in the Semite culture, wisdom was not information. In the Greek culture, wisdom is information. In the Semite culture, that is the Jewish culture, wisdom was problem solving. So wisdom is the ability to solve problems. So the king says, I want people who, not just people who know the theory, but who know how to apply the theory, people who know how to solve problems. Gifted in all wisdom. I want people who are possessing of knowledge. In other words, people who are informed. One who knows what's going on around them. And one people who are quick to understand, clever. You don't have to teach them the same thing 10 times. I want to be sure that I'm not going to waste my time trying to teach this person one lesson. So when I meet them, and when Ashpenaz meets you, Ashpenaz wants to be sure that you're not going to be a drag and a waste on anybody's time. Quick to understand, clever. And then I want people who are cultured. They are able to serve in the king's palace. Somebody with poise and confidence to perform on the big stage. Now, connection to Nebuchadnezzar's system will require training. So there is the recruitment. This is what we are looking for. And then he says, when you come in, we're going to train you. We're going to train you. So they're going to undergo a 3-year training course. I like Nebuchadnezzar. He was just a smart guy. We're going to train you. You are Jews. We're going to make you Babylonians. Wherever you come from, by the time we are through with you, you're going to think like us. Now, this is a system Daniel is trying to penetrate. It's a system that potentially can make him rebel against his God. But he survived it, and I'm going to show you how he was able to do it. So there is the training component, and there are 2 main components of the training. First is language, and second is literature. He says we're going to train them the language of the Chaldeans and the literature of the Chaldeans. You know, what is language? Mastery of communication. Our world has been powerfully influenced by the power of language. Language is like the train that carries goods from one place to the other. God created the world with words. Words are very powerful. Somebody says, well, words are cheap. Well, to one extent, I can understand why people will say words are cheap. That means words that are not backed with anything. Yeah, that's cheap. But words are very powerful. The world has been moved by words. Wars have been won by words. When David met Goliath, he won the word power before the physical battle. Goliath used words, I'm going to kill you. And David says, yeah, you come to me with a sword and with a spear. I come to you in the name of the Lord and blah, blah, blah. That's what I'm going to do. It's a match of words. Words are very powerful. If you're going to win in the corridors of power, you have to be a master of words. Mastery of communication. Now, for people who are recent migrants to any nation, you have to learn to speak in the language of your migrated country for them to understand you. If you are seeking to enter their power system, you have to learn to do that. Now, that doesn't mean that if you are a Ghanaian, you come to America, by all means start, slurring your words like an American. Sometimes if you don't do it too well, it becomes a bit awkward. There is authenticity. Be authentic. The most important thing with language is clarity of pronunciation, that your words can be heard. It's not trying to imitate a native speaker. Leave that to your children. So language, mastery of communication. Presidents lead nations with words. In the corridors of power, words are very, very important. During the Second World War, after Germany had attacked Great Britain in that blitzkrieg and bombs dropping everywhere, they had to change prime ministers because they couldn't cope with the power of Hitler. And Winston Churchill became prime minister, and he had to rally Britain with words. Words, not guns, words. He spoke to them and said, we will never surrender. We'll fight in the sky, we'll fight in the air, we'll fight on the ground, we'll fight on the sea, and we'll never yield, we'll never surrender, and they're going to win the battle. And the whole nation galvanized itself and won the battle. They had arms and were losing. They had armies and were losing. But words changed the configuration of the battle. Don't ever underestimate the power of words. If you're going to be a great leader, you have to be a master of words. You have to learn words. And then, so they said they're going to train them with language, and they're going to give them mastery of literature. Literature. That means the philosophy and ideas of their society. Our world is run on ideas. Literature controls the world. The literature of the Babylonian system, including their history and their religion. Now, Daniel had to start studying the religion of the Babylonians. Very profound. Somebody say, hey, wouldn't he backslide? No, he had to study it because there's a difference between knowledge and belief. I can study Islam and not be a Muslim. And a Muslim can study Christianity and get a PhD in Christian religion and believe nothing. Knowing the religion of the place you function in is critical to your success. The philosophy, the ideas of the place you function in. When I started traveling to this nation years ago to minister, God opened doors for me to minister in America. I started studying American history. I think I'm a pretty good student on American history. Constantly reading American history, American religion, American philosophy. I looked at how this nation was formed, the philosophy that formed it, the first group of people, how they settled, how they moved, how the West was developed, and all of that, how slavery began, what factors brought in slavery, when did racism begin in this country? What were the factors that developed racism? What was racism based on? Because, contemporary knowledge is not always the same as historical knowledge. If you understand how things began, you will understand why they are where they are now. Most people comment on what is there now and don't understand how things got to where they are now. Nebuchadnezzar says, Daniel, I'm going to teach you the language of the Chaldeans, and I'm going to teach you the literature of the Chaldeans. After 3 years, Daniel, you're going to be a Babylonian. Just amazing. So, if you look at the system, if you were Daniel, there were two choices you had to make. I'm a Jew. I believe in one God. I believe in Yahweh. Yes, we lost the battle. I know why we lost the battle. It was not because Yahweh was not powerful, but because our people disobeyed Yahweh. And he himself said through Jeremiah and Isaiah and all these prophets that because of our disobedience, we're going to go to Babylon. So although they had been defeated, Daniel understood the reason for their defeat. He understood it was not a failure on the part of Yahweh. It's a failure on the part of Yahweh's people. So he's not in rebellion against God, although if you looked at it on the outside, it would look as if God had turned his back on them. Now, if you don't understand the differences in God's dealings, sometimes you may go through an experience and begin to fight God. But it will not be God who is really battling you. It may be other circumstances that have led to your experience. And Daniel could discern and decipher between his own actions and that of the larger Israelite group. So he's in captivity. The articles of his God are now in the house of the god of Babylon. That means that religiously they have been defeated. Philosophically, they've been defeated. Now Nebuchadnezzar says, come and learn my religion. Come and learn my philosophy. Come and learn my language. Daniel has to make a choice. The guy wants to convert me. He can say, no, Nebuchadnezzar, just leave me alone. I'll just join the Jews who are slaves on the farm, and I will labor there and die as a slave because I prefer my faith to the corridors of power. So leave me as a slave to die. And he could have made a choice. Or he would say, I'm going to come into the system that is designed to defeat me with my own agenda. And that was the choice Daniel made. It was a very risky choice, but he made it. Because as you climb high into those places, your faith will be challenged at every step. And you have to resolve. So how did Daniel manage this? From verse 5 of Daniel chapter 1. From verse 5 it says, Then and the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. To Daniel he gave the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. So this is a major thing. So this is Nebuchadnezzar's agenda. He wants to transform Daniel from a Jew to a Babylonian. And he wants to use Daniel's kingdom, Daniel's intelligence, to build his kingdom. And so he starts the process of transformation. I'm going to train you, but I'm going to even change your identity. And if you read deeper into the meaning of the names, all those names, Belteshazzar, Abednego, Shadrach, now we quote them as if they are Christian names. Let me tell you, these were pagan names, names associated to the gods of Babylon. So he's literally saying Daniel. Daniel means God is my judge, because El is God and Dan is judge. He says you're not just God, you're not identified with Yahweh, you're identified now with the gods of Babylon. And all of them were giving those names. Now, they could have said, well, if you will change our name, then we will go back to be slaves and we will slave for you, but we can't function in the corridors of power. It's a choice to make. So they changed his name. Daniel said, well, you call me Belteshazzar, fine. I have to penetrate your system. And I'm ready to change my name. The interesting thing about Daniel is that they called him Belteshazzar, but he never called himself Belteshazzar. If you read the book of Daniel, he'll say, I, Daniel, saw the vision. I, Daniel. He never said, I, Belteshazzar. So they call him Belteshazzar. That's fine. That you think that's my name. But before God, I am Daniel. When I see a vision, I, Daniel. He never spiritually took on that identity. But he used it. It's almost like having, there are Ghanaians I know who are called nice Ghanaian names, and you come to America, their names have changed. And somebody is called Robert Michael. You say, wow, I didn't know you called Robert Michael. We knew as Kwekudia, in himself, he knows he's Kwekudia, but the Americans call him Robert Michael. That's fine. If you call me Robert Michael, that makes you feel good. I know who I am. So that's what is happening. Daniel says, you can call me Belteshazzar. If that's what pleases you, it's good on your tongue, and it satisfies you. My name, Daniel, is too hard for you to pronounce. I give you the right. Call me Belteshazzar. But I know who I am. I am Daniel. I belong to God. I'm a servant of God. I want to penetrate your system. So Nebuchadnezzar has an agenda, but Daniel also has an agenda. And that's what I like about Daniel. He figured all of this out. He says, I'm not going to leave Judah and be a slave in Babylon. I'm leaving Judah to be a ruler in Babylon. And I cannot rule in slave quarters. I cannot just run away from this system because it's foreign to me, it's difficult for me. I'm not going to live amongst my people, because my people want to be out there in that place and live their people life. But I want to live with the Babylonians, and I want to take over their system for Yahweh. You defeated Yahweh on the battleground, Yahweh will defeat you in the corridors of power. And I'm going to smuggle Yahweh into your system and control it. The reason why most Christians cannot function in the world is because the world system is so difficult for them to deal with. So difficult. And because sometimes Christians have very stiff and fast rules. We can't deal with complexity. For most Christians, everything is black and white. This is of God, it's not of God. This is of God, it's a devil. It's God, devil. This is a devil, this is a devil, this is a devil. Sometimes, my friends, life is more complicated than that. One of my favorite stories it has to do with Naaman. You remember Naaman, the Syrian general who got healed from leprosy by Elisha. And when he was going back after he had gotten healed, he says to Elisha, now I know that Yahweh is the God. I know that. So you can say he's born again, he's converted. But he says, my job is a very tricky one. I am the king's bodyguard. And when the king goes to serve his God, I have to go with him. That's my job. And when he bows before his God, I have to bow. That's my job. That's my professional requirement. He says, I know it's a conflict of my faith. So as a sign that when I do that, I am not denying Yahweh, I want you to allow me to take some of the sand from Samaria to carry with me to Syria. And anytime I stand before the gods of my king and he bows, I'll sprinkle a few of the sand of Samaria under my feet, so that he would think I am bowing to his God, but in my heart I am standing on Samarian ground before Yahweh Almighty. So what Naaman is saying is, I can play the game for him, but I will never compromise my faith. Listen, my friends, it's not always devil and God. It's not always black and white. Sometimes pushing into the corridors of power, we have to deal with conflict. And the conflicts may be very severe, and we have to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. We can keep our heart pure and still play the world system. Do you know unbelievers can penetrate our system very easily? They'll come to our church, lift up your hand. They lift up. Pray in tongues. Oh, yeah. I had a lady anthropologist who was doing a research on Christianity, came to my church, came to church for 1 year, more than 1 year. Came for every prayer meeting. I was so glad. I said, oh, this lady is born again. We lift up our hands, she dances. She did all of that. When she had finished, I said, oh, I've won a son to Christ. I said, now that you are a Christian, he says, Pastor, I'm not a Christian, I'm still an atheist. She went through the motions. I said, if an unbeliever can penetrate my system and go through the motions, I can penetrate her system and go through the motions. Because Christians sometimes are so afraid to encounter the world because we are afraid we'll lose our faith. I remember in our Bible college, we're doing comparative religions for Bible school students. Christians just want to read the Bible. We told the students, well, these are world religions. So we gave all the students assignment. We said, go to a Hindu temple, go to a Buddhist temple, go to all these temples, go to a mosque, and go and sit down with the imam and the priest and interview them about their beliefs. The students were scared. So, well, Pastor, what if we go and something enters us? I said, aren't you the one who has been quoting, greater is he who is in me than he that is in the world? You're afraid something will enter you? Do you know the Hindu can come and sit in your church? And the Buddhist will sit in your church and still leave? They can enter our space. We are afraid to enter their space. And if you cannot enter their space, how can you take Yahweh to their space? So this is what Daniel has to deal with. It's not clean cut, just decide, okay, I'm going back to Judah. Well, you can't go back to Judah. You are in Babylon. Judah is now under Babylonian control. Well, if this is what he's talking about, then I will just be a slave. I don't want to be in any corridor of power. Then you have no influence in Babylon. If you want to have influence, it's going to be a different game. So go to verse 8, Daniel chapter 1. It says from verse 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king. That's a very powerful statement. You will endanger my head. So the coach, Ashpenaz, says, listen, you're putting my job in jeopardy, and I can be executed for this. Now, This is what Daniel says. So Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the king's portions and delicacies. And as you see fit, so deal with your servants. So he consented with them in this matter and tested them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Then the steward took away the portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. Eat your vegetables. As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all wisdom and the literature, and Daniel had understanding and all vision and dreams. So Daniel also has an agenda. His agenda is he's going to introduce Yahweh to Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. And his agenda is he's going to be more influential than the most influential advisor to Nebuchadnezzar. So when Daniel goes into Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, he says, by the time I leave here, this guy is going to recognize that there is a greater God than his gods. And by the time I leave here, I'll be the number one advisor, trusted advisor of Nebuchadnezzar. I'm going to be the person he listens to. Now from verse 18. Now at the end of the 10 days, of the end of the days, that's the 3 years, when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Then the king interviewed them and interviewed them, and among them all, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they said before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and knowledge and understanding which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. Thus Daniel continued into the first year of King Cyrus. Daniel challenged the system. He tested the system. He changed the rules, and he excelled over the competition. He negotiated space for himself. And that's the interesting thing about Daniel. He knew how to negotiate for extra space. He did not just say, well, if you're going to give me the food, I won't eat it. He says, well, I'm going to give you a trial period. I think I have a superior process. I think that I have a better way. So just give me the chance to prove that the system I have is better. 10 days trial. If it doesn't work, money back guarantee. They tested them after 10 days, and it was proven that they had a better system. Listen to me. If what you believe is right, it will provide better results in the marketplace. If what you believe is right, it will provide better results in the marketplace. And that is how Daniel entered the system. Got the confidence of his mentor to give him concessions. And the Bible says after training, he was 10 times better. And you know what happened after that? When the test came for them to prove what they had, and Daniel was able to showcase that there was a God who was greater than Nebuchadnezzar's God. I'm going to deal with that tomorrow. But we're going to see how Daniel moved this system, and we're going to see how, in the end, Daniel took over Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. Not only in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, but in the time of Nebuchadnezzar's son, and even in the time of Cyrus and in the time of Darius. Even after the Babylonians had been conquered, Daniel was retained. His voice was strong for 70 years until a new leader arose who began, because of Daniel, got stirred up to say, it's time for the Jews to go back to their land. 70 years. One man took the destiny of a whole nation on his shoulders, changed the world's superpower and the next superpower after the existing superpower, and restored Israel back to its homeland, because one man dared to walk in the corridors of power. And he was not afraid to encounter the power systems of the world. Let me tell you this. Anybody who has been around power, power is very, very dangerous. The first time you get around powerful people and you hear their conversation, you go home, your head will spin. Because the things they are talking about and the issues they are dealing with are heavy. But they are dealing with it so easily. And sometimes without any consideration. Because sometimes you think that, well, you know, when you are in a nation, I mean, you're in America, you think, wow, by the time, you know, the Congress makes a decision, they've processed it, and they've gone through this, and they've thought about it. When you go through the process and see how reckless they are with decision making, you will be shocked that your destiny is in the hands of people who care nothing about you. You think it's a well-developed system, it's not. You think those senators there have sleepless nights thinking about how to solve your problem, you are joking. You think the president is so concerned about your welfare, you are joking. If you don't represent yourself in the corridors of power, you will have no voice. And that's what Daniel determined. We have to be represented in Babylon, not in slave quarters, but in the palace. There are many Christians represented in slave quarters, but very few Christians represented in the corridors of power. There are many Christians represented in prayer camps, but very few Christians represented in the corridors of power whose voice change decisions. Christians think that they've solved the problems of the world on their knees. I used to think that way until I realized our prayers, it doesn't change people much. The people of this world are so stubborn. Even if the righteous can resist God, you think the unbeliever will listen to God? God will speak to them, they won't hear. God will say left, they will go right. Until you get yourself represented in the corridors of power, you are voiceless, powerless, prayerful, but powerless. And we need more Christians in the corridors of power. And I'm not just talking about political power. I'm talking about the entertainment industry. You know, because every major agenda in the world, we're going to see it in TV series, in movies, Disney cartoons. And you start seeing all the signs. You say, well, this is what they're trying to achieve. So who is writing the screen stories for Disney cartoons? How many Christians are screenwriters? How many Christians are in Hollywood? Many times we hear one Christian, we say, oh, hooray! He's just a class B actor who doesn't get jobs much. But he sits and, you know, just talks about being on Hollywood, but he's not influential. How many directors of movies are Christians? How many class A directors? How many top producers are believers? Because it's a cutthroat world. And Christians, we don't like cutthroat, you know, so the world gets risky, we say, okay, all right, this is too worldly, it's getting too worldly, it's getting too, leave them. You know, we'll just pray about it. God moves in mysterious ways. His wonders to perform. God can use everything. God can do anything. No, that's not what Daniel did. Daniel says when they come to the corridors of power and decisions are being made and they call for options, the voice of Daniel must be heard. That was the problem of the Jews when they were in Israel. They were more than the Egyptians. The Jews, when they were in Egypt, they were more than the Egyptians. The Egyptians themselves said, the people, they are more than us. So let's figure out a way to knock them off. And when they went to caucus, there was no one Jewish voice because they were all living in Goshen. Slave quarters. Thank God for Goshen. But it's not the corridors of power. It's the place of comfort. Thank God for our prayer meetings. It's not the corridors of power. We need a new generation of Christians who penetrate the entertainment industry, the media industry, to become producers of news programs, anchors of news programs, script writers, animators, take over the entertainment industry. We need Christians writing new programs, new game shows, and sneaking in the name of Jesus. Just sneak it in. 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 Just like people have been sneaking in all kinds of agendas. All kinds of agendas. Sneak them in. Sneak them in. Sneak them in. We have to sneak Jesus in. And we can only do that if we act like Daniel and we determine we can function in the corridors of power in spite of all the agenda that goes on there. We also have an agenda for Jehovah. And tomorrow I'm going to take it a little further to show the strategy of Daniel and how he achieved that. And I believe that God is calling a new generation of believers, not just to hide in our sanctuaries, in our churches, but venture to go high. High. In all industries, in the banking industry, entertainment. Entertainment industry is so important to me. Because whether we like it or not, that's what is controlling the world. It's not politics. That's why when it's politics time, everybody wants some entertainers to endorse them. It didn't work the last time, but normally it works. That's another story altogether. But we have to get into the corridors of power. And I believe there are people sitting here whose destiny is not in Goshen, whose destiny is not in slave camp. Your destiny is in the corridors of power. You are going to penetrate those industries. The doors will be open to you where they say Christians cannot come in. You will enter there and you will set an agenda for Jesus Christ. His name will be mentioned on every lip, in every industry, in every world. You will be an ambassador. You will be a Daniel for your generation. How many of you are ready to do that? You're going to go high. Just lift up your hands to God. I pray, Father, for grace, 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 grace. The grace of Daniel to rest upon your people. That in this house, world changers will step into the corridors of power. Men and women who would penetrate and have the wisdom of Daniel to stand without compromising their faith, but to penetrate to the highest level. In every industry in this nation, may the voice of Christ be heard. In education, may the voice of Christ be heard. In entertainment, may the voice of Christ be heard. In sports, may the voice of Christ be heard. In academia, in the lecture halls, may the voice of Christ be heard. In the Ivy League schools, in Harvard, may the voice of Christ be heard. In Yale, may the voice of Christ be heard. In all the top universities, may the voice of Christ be heard. May you raise up professors of faith, scientists who profess Christ, who will get to the highest level. In the psychology and sociology departments, may you raise the voices of Christ. May the voice of Christ be heard in the medical field, in all the other fields. Let the voice of Christ be heard. And Father, raise up Esthers and Daniels who are not afraid to venture into the corridors of power. Amen and amen. God bless you.
Thank you for watching this video. We believe you have been touched by this message. If you have any comments on this video, kindly leave it in the comments section. If you have any enquiries or testimonies, you can also leave it in the comments section. If you've not subscribed to this channel yet, kindly do so and turn on your notification bell. And if you enjoyed today's message, kindly like and share with others. Thank you and see you in the next video.
Jesus